All right, well, in this short video, I want to give you a little bit of an introduction to Mounce's Morphology of Biblical Greek. Now, I know this is a reasonably challenging book to use the first time, but it's so indispensable, and it's worth just taking a few moments to talk about how to use it now. I just want to sort of give you a little bit of a heads up around how this book is organized and how to get some decent use out of it. So let's start with the layout. Basically, let's just sort of talk first of all about the layout here, and you can see there's actually a how to use MBG right here at the beginning. Now, I don't recommend that you necessarily go read this. It could be helpful, but I'm going to walk you through most of what you find in here anyway, so don't worry too much about that. The key thing I want you to know to start with is that this is not a book that is designed for people who don't know Greek. It assumes you know some stuff about Greek. It assumes you know the grammar, and you can distinguish between like a noun and an adjective and a verb and so on, and you know the difference between the different tense forms and so on as well. So it's designed really to give you that deeper understanding of the morphology, how words are formed and so on. And the reason for this, and if you can go back to the preface here, you can see exactly what he means here. The argument he makes here is that you can go through and learn all the different forms of all the different words, or you can learn how the different words change based on the rules. And this whole book is designed to give you an overview of how the words actually change, so that when you see different forms, you don't have to try and work out what's that word. You know the basic word, you know the principal part of it, the main lexical form of it, and then from there you can say, okay, since I know this is Lego, it's lambda epsilon gamma is the root of it, so therefore I can see this as a future form of that, for instance, or whatever it happens to be. So it's designed to sort of give you that understanding of the basis of how the words change, so that you can work it out for yourself. Now, of course, it's not quite that simple, because as you've already started to discover, some words change in ways that you might not expect it. And the goal here is not to have you learn all the different rules necessarily, but to just begin to recognize the different patterns of Greek. That's really the key here. So let me jump into, let's jump into principal parts to start with. What I want to sort of just show you here, I'm just going to jump in here. You can see here we have these columns, and you might start by wondering, well, what are these columns? Let me explain these to you. The first column here, each of these columns represents a different Greek tense form. Now, at this stage, all you've learned is aorist verbs, okay? So you don't know most of these tense forms, and that's okay. We're going to learn all of these tense forms, but for the moment, let's just start with the aorist tense forms. So this first column here is present tense forms. We're going to learn those in a later chapter. Then we have the future tense forms, and then we have the aorist active tense forms. These are the ones that you've already learned. You can see here, you've got your augment, and so on. You've got your sigma, alpha. So you can start to see how this works. So these are the aorist active indicative first person singular form of these words. This over here, on the other hand, this present tense form is the form you'll find in your lexicon or your dictionary. This is the one you see on your vocabulary. So the present tense is found first, because that's the lexical form. That's the one you're going to look up if you want to know what this word is. The third form is the aorist active indicative form. The next one is the perfect active indicative form. Then we have our perfect passive indicative form, and then we have our aorist passive form. Now, again, we're going to learn really the future forms, and then the perfect forms are the last forms we're going to learn. So for the moment, focus on this third column and the first column, and then later we'll get into this last column as well. Now, there are other forms, of course. There's the aorist middle form, there's the present middle form, there's all sorts of other forms as well. So this is not an exhaustive list. It's just to give you a bit of an overview of how these words are formed in the different tense forms. Again, don't feel you have to memorize this. Just for the moment, just know that the first form is a lexical form, the third one is the aorist form, and the rest of them will start to fill in as you go along. All right, so that's the principal parts. These are called principal parts because they are the principal forms, if you like, that you're going to find of these words. Let me just see, you can see on the left-hand side here, when we look at our chapters, our different structured contents, if you like, of this. You can see here what we've got under principal parts is we've got class V1, V2, V3, V4, V5, 6, 7, and 8. What does all this refer to? Well, these are all different ways that verbs are created, formed. So this first one, V1, this is verbs where the present stem and the verbal root are the same. This is your first aorist forms. All your first aorist forms are going to be V1 forms in one way or another. But then you can see underneath this, we can actually drill down to a bunch of different types of this. So there are some forms that end in an iota or a digamma. There are other forms that end in a stop. There are some forms ending in a liquid or a nasal, and there are other forms ending in a vowel. And so what he does here is he breaks these forms out. So this is the stem. So if you get a stem, let me go to the vowel ones. So let's have a look here. What we've got here is we've got, let's say, atamao, to dishonor. Maybe that's not a great example. Let's say ganao. Here we go. This is a good one. To give birth to. This means to give birth to. So what we've got here is we've got the present active form of that, and then you can see the future active form, and then you can see the aorist active form of it as well. And you can see here the form here. These are one word roots, if you like, that end in an alpha, and that alpha lengthens before the tense formative, and you can see that very clearly here before the sigma alpha. So these are the kinds of forms that you're used to seeing right now. Now there's a whole bunch of these. You can go explore them all later to your heart's content. But the point here is that all of these are the same in the sense that these are all verbs where the present stem is the same as the verbal root, which is what the definition of a first aorist form is. You've also got present stem is change. So these ones all refer to changes to the present tense stem. Now we're going to talk about present tense form changes in a later lesson because, and this is why I've taught you the aorist form first, because the aorist form is very consistent. It's the present tense form that tends to modify the word and the root to make the present tense stem. So the present tense stem where it just adds iotas, the present tense stem where it adds a nu or a tau or a sigma kappa with normally with an iota on it, and then athematic verbs, which we're going to learn about right at the very end of this course. So these are just breaking this down into the ways that the present tense stem actually modifies the roots to make the lexical form. Again, we're going to look at all of this in a lot more detail in a later lesson. We've actually got a lesson dedicated to the present stem and how it changes all its roots. Okay, so don't stress about what these are. You don't have to memorize them. Just know that that's how he's structured this book for the moment. So that brings me to a really important point here, and that is that you're probably not going to pick this book up and read it, right? It's not really intended as a book you're just going to read. What you're going to do for the most part is you're going to open the index down here, and let's say we're going to go down to lambda, and we're going to look for a word that you're going to find pretty regularly, which is this word Lego. Okay, so you can see it here. Now, notice here next to Lego, you've got V1B. Now, what does that tell you? Well, that means that this is one of those words that ends in a vela. So you can see V1B parenthesis 2. And so you can see his heading here, roots ending in a vela. So I've just moused over this, and in Logos, this will give you a hyperlink. The little box, if you like, gives you a hyperlink to a preview, if you like, of the content in that section. What about this V7 and V8? Well, that's good. I'm glad you asked. So what we have in V7 and V8, these are repetitions, essentially. V7 and V8 are repetitions of content already given in V1 through 6. You might say, well, why the difference? Well, look at this. He says here, the roots listed here have already been listed in categories 1 through 6. He's just broken these out just to make them a little bit easier to look at. So there's less of these, rather than giving them to you all in these big blocks here. He's wanted to show, let me just show you how these forms are different in some way. These ones are the words that change their stem vowel in the formation of principal parts. He's got a little note here, and you can hyperlink to all of this. So this includes attic reduplication, which is why we've got things like the akoa here, akusa here, and akakoa here. This is what's called attic reduplication in the perfect tense form. But you can see some of the other ones here. You've got here jinomai, which becomes ejinomen, as we see it here in the aorist form. And so you can see the iota here switches for an epsilon. So this is an example of one of those words that changes the stem vowel in the aorist form. If we go down to V8, these are the 9 words that have a different root in the different forms. So you can see here Lego, for instance, has the root apon, ape, it's epsilon iota p, in the aorist form. And so ero is the future form of it. So you can see these are just listed out to say these are words where the present stem is just a completely different root to the other stems that you might encounter. So let's go back again to lambda here. And when we see Lego here, and we see V1B2, this is V1B2. This is the basic category that this belongs to. That means it's one of these words where the root ends in a gamma. It's also one of these words where because it's a V1, it's the present tense stem is the verbal root. Okay. Okay, the problem is you got multiple roots, which is why it's under V7 and V8. Okay, so this is what these means. Basically, when you get these multiple ones, what I would encourage you to do, like you have here for LAPO, just work with this first one here. That's going to give you the details you really need. You tend to find that V7 and V8 are great for a summary of the kind of change that you're looking at, but if you actually want the detail, you're going to find more detail if you look at this option here. So let's jump over to V1B, parentheses 2, and we're going to jump down here to Lego. Now you can see there are, well, you can't see, but there are actually 2 entries for Lego, and the reason for that is that in Homeric Greek there is actually another word, Lego, which means to pick up, which we don't see anywhere in the New Testament. So there's really only one word, Lego, you need to learn for New Testament and Septuagint, Greek for that matter. So here we have Lego, and you can see here we've got our principal parts, so present tense stem, future tense stem, aorist tense stem, perfect active tense stem, perfect passive tense stem, and then our aorist passive tense stem. And you can see all the changes that take place across those. Now, those changes will become more important as you get to see those tense forms later on. But if we want to see what's going on here, you can see this little hyperlink here. We click on that. You can see here it says from the root meaning say. Compounds are. So it gives you a bunch of different compound words. And then we've got some compounds for apon as well. And then you can see here underneath here, it says Lego uses multiple roots, V-8. So this is why it's listed in V8, because it's got this star followed by leg. That's indicating that this is one of the roots. Then you've got a star followed by digamma epsilon P, and then a digamma rho and eta as well. So these are the 3 different roots that you're going to find for this. And if you want to look at examples of these, go to V8 and you'll see them all. And then if you want to look at how the tense stem changes its vowel, then you can look at that in V7 as well. So these little details down here just give you a bit of insight into what's going on to help you identify how words are changing. Let's look at another example on this page, echo. Echo means to have, to hold, you know this word. If you click on this one again, it tells you here's the root. Right away there you know, oh, okay, this is a bit different. So you're used to seeing echo, but look at the root. It's sigma epa key. Now that tells you right away that there's something different with this. And he goes on to explain what that is. The sigma drops off and is replaced with a rough breathing. That's why we get echo becomes hexo in the future tense form. Whenever there is another aspirate, such as a key in the verb, the rough breathing, which is also an aspirate, deaspirates to a smooth breathing. Whenever the second aspirate is lost, as it is in the future, the rough breathing will return. So that gives you an explanation of why this changes from a smooth breathing in the present tense form to a rough breathing in the future tense form. And so these kinds of little tips are just really helpful to explain what's going on here. You'll also know that in the imperfect, the augment in the imperfect actually is a little bit funky here, because normally you'd look to see, if you get echo, you'd expect to see the epsilon lengthen to an eta, but that's not what happens. Instead, what happens is the augment, the epsilon augment, joins to the epsilon first letter, and you get a contraction which creates epsilon iota, and so because the sigma can't stand between 2 vowels and so on, it drops out. And so these kinds of tips are really built into the footnote here, where Mounce gives you a lot of detail about the kinds of changes you should expect to see in these words. Let me give you another example. So let's say we are here reading John 7 verse 45, and we get to this verse here and we read, and they came therefore the assistants of the high priests and the Pharisees, and they said to them, why did you not bring him? Right, so they're asking this question, why did you not bring him? And you're looking at this agagete here and you're going, what on earth is that? And maybe you look at the bottom of the screen and you see this is from the word argo, and you're going, well, that doesn't look anything like argo. Well, here's what to do. Jump over into the Morphology of Biblical Greek, jump down to the index here, take a look for argo, and we can see here it's a page or 2 along. Here we go. Argo, there it is. Okay, so here's argo here, and you can see it's got the standard V1B2. So let's click on V1B2, and here it is, and you can see there's a footnote. And if we click on it here, we go, okay, all of that's interesting, but look at the aorist form here. And there's a footnote next to the aorist form. Well, let's see what that says. It says here that this form receives both reduplication and an augment. What's the reduplication? Reduplication is when the first gamma, or let me rephrase that, the first consonant is doubled up, and you end up getting a doubling of the vowel in between as well. So this is what's going on here. And it gives you this little sequencing. So you get ug, which becomes agag, which then gets the augment and becomes agagon when you put the ending on. So again, this is going to be one of those funky forms, and this is telling you exactly why. Now he's arguing this is different from attic reduplication. You can go look up our attic reduplication there if you want to, using this little hyperlink, where it is not the reduplicated vowel, but the original vowel that is lengthened. So this is a second aorist, but also has a first aorist form. And this second aorist, this is why you've got an omicron nu on the end here, because a second aorist form, which we will learn in a later lesson, doesn't take the sigma alpha tense formative, it takes a connecting vowel and the secondary active endings instead. So this is explaining then why we get this funky form that we see here in this passage in John 7:45. And with that now you can move on, because you've now understood why this looks like agagate in this particular case. So that's a little introduction about how to use the morphology of Biblical Greek. I really want to encourage you to use this as regularly as you can. It's very, very helpful, particularly for verbs. You'll also find it helpful for nouns. If we come into the introduction to nouns section here, you can see third declension nouns. This explains some of the changes that take place in third declension nouns as well. So this has basically got some explanations for all the different changes, funky though they may be, that take place in Greek. And by understanding just a few of these, you'll start to see the patterns that emerge and how the language is working. Now, again, this is not intended to be something you have to memorize. This is just a guide for those times when you get stuck. The more you look this up once you are stuck, the easier it's going to be for you to remember, oh, I looked that up. And one of my professors once told me he had a trick, and this is before the days of computers, but he would have a book like this and he would put it on the other side of the room. And every time he needed to use it, he would go to the other side of the room to use it and then come back. And that forced him to actually remember better what he was looking at when he looked it up, because he didn't want to have to look and go across the room again to look it up. But the point here is just to use this as a tool, if you like, to get your head around some of these words that change. And bear in mind that the words that change the most are the most common words by and large. These are the ones that people used all the time, and therefore for stylistic reasons they tended to get used in a particular way, and that tended to go into, the popular usage of that word. So when you find these really weird looking words, they're often going to be very popular words and words that you're going to see pretty regularly in the New Testament. So I hope that's helpful. Get into this resource, get a copy if you don't already. I'll leave links to it below so you can go grab your own copy from Logos, or you can buy a physical copy on Amazon. And I look forward to hearing your feedback and how this serves you well as you go through and learn Greek.